Welcome to Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. Legal issues simplified through real client stories and real-world experiences. Creating simplicity in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to Season 2 of the Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. I'm your host, ByrdAdatto, with my co-host, Michael Byrd.
Thanks, Brad. As a business and healthcare law firm, we meet a lot of interesting people and learn their amazing stories. In today's episode, we're going to talk with a friend of ours on one of the biggest risks to a medical practice, patients. Brad, the title of the episode is Patients, Practice Lifeblood or Practice Threat? Do you know which one it is?
Yes.
Yeah, both, right?
Yeah.
It reminds me of the viral internet dress from a few years ago. People would almost throw down over whether the dress was black and royal blue or white and gold. I think your viewpoint dictates everything. Just so you know, I'm in camp black and blue.
All right, well, let's go back to the question. Is the patient lifeblood or threat? And I think it unfortunately depends. It's going to be a matter of the perspective of whether the patient is key to your success or your biggest threat. But I think our guest might have some thoughts on these questions, but before we introduce our guest, I have some random questions for you, Michael. Do you know how many doctors are in the U.S.?
No.
Well, according to what I found on this thing called the World Wide Web, as of June of 2020, there's a little over 500,000 physicians in the United States. And how about the number of lawyers, Michael?
I have no idea.
Well, would you assume there's more lawyers than doctors?
Well, based on all the lawyer jokes, yes.
Okay, your assumption would be correct. And based on some additional research, I discovered that as of 2019, there were 1.35 million lawyers in the U.S., which is virtually unchanged since 2015, where there was 1.3 million. So as you can see, there's a lot more lawyers than doctors. But one more question for you, and this is a tough one. How many of them that are doctors are also lawyers?
Don't know, Brad. I didn't know the answer to the first two, so I certainly don't know this one, but I'm guessing less than 1.3 million.
That would be correct also, but in fact, statistically speaking, there's so few JD MDs or MD JDs in the U.S., I could not find any accounting or statistics, and this is why our next guest is so special.
Yes, we have our friend and partner, Dr. Jeff Segal, joining us today. And because he's a doctor and a lawyer, I think he can see both the black and gold version of the dress the black and blue version of the dress and the white and gold version.
Probably.
So a little bit on Jeff's background. Jeff is a partner here at ByrdAdatto. He's an attorney licensed in the state of California. He went to medical school at the Baylor College of Medicine in Texas. He's a neurosurgeon. Most important for everyone to know is that he graduated from the University of Texas in Austin, undergrad, Hookham. And he is the founder of Medical Justice and eMerit. On a personal level, his wife of many years through many of Jeff's adventures is Shelley. He has Josh and Jordan, twins. And Jeff is a avid cyclist, scuba diver, and climber. And Brad and I can attest to this, owner of many incredible stories. Welcome, Jeff.
And some of them are even true. So thank you very much for allowing me to join you today. This is great.
Awesome. Well, we're really glad you're here. And the idea of, the impact of a patient to a practice is so important because it is such a risk, yet you can't have a medical practice without them. So we look forward to diving in with you. And, one thing, obviously, with your educational background, you clearly have a passion for education. When you were in medical school, did you ever think, I can't wait to be an attorney one day?
I can assure you with 100% certainty and clarity that thought bubble never entered my brain. Not once, not in a million years. So short answer, no.
Good. You're a smart man. See, this is why. So Jeff, Michael and I have had the privilege of hearing your story over the years, and I really think your journey is a very powerful one. And I'd love for you to share with our audience how a successful neurosurgeon decides basically overnight to stop practicing full time.
So my story was circuitous. It wasn't planned. It just happened. I was perfectly delighted practicing as a neurosurgeon in the Midwest. And at the time when I was there, I had my wife had a set of twins. I had a set of twins, but she delivered them. And at the age of 3, my son was diagnosed with pretty severe regressive autism and medication-resistant epilepsy. So this was, to say the least, a significant road bump in our lives. We had to figure out what to do. We ended up moving to North Carolina, primarily to seek services for Josh, my son. And I intended to take a year off, planning to go back to doing what I knew how to do, which is neurosurgery. In that 1-year window, I became convinced that a certain set of pharmaceutical compounds might help him. They were sitting on a shelf at University of North Carolina. So like a neurosurgeon, I walked in there and I said, how do we get these out? And they said, well, you got to raise some money, you got to license the compounds, et cetera, et cetera. So I did that. And we started a biotechnology company in Research Triangle Park and moved compounds from preclinical to phase 2, which is pretty far along on a shoestring budget. Needless to say, I didn't go back to the practice of neurosurgery because a window of time had passed. It was probably 4 or 5 years. And while I'm arrogant enough to believe that I could have gone back to the practice of neurosurgery, I didn't think I could persuade any sane patient to go under my scalpel. So anyway, I figured I had to do something with my life. And the entrepreneurial bug hit. I understood healthcare, and I had actually been sued one time for what I perceived to be a frivolous reason. The single expert who testified against me had previously been expelled from our specialty society for delivering fraudulent or frivolous testimony, yet there he was making a handsome living testifying. Why? He communicated well to a jury, even though he had never seen or done the case at issue. So in any event, that case, the professional liability case, was dropped about 2 weeks before trial. I never felt as if I won anything, just felt as if I lost less. And I figured there had to be a better way to manage this stuff. So I formed Medical Justice as a way to keep doctors from being sued for frivolous reasons, and more broadly, to help de-escalate patient conflict, which is kind of one of the underlying themes of our conversation today.
What year did you start Medical Justice?
So Medical Justice launched as an idea in 2001 and really started taking off in 2004, 2005.
And I'm guessing that it has evolved over the years. So that's been in business for quite a while now.
It has. I mean, I think it's safe to say we've been in business for the most part for about 20 years. We've worked with over 11,000 doctors. Every time I think I've heard it all, I'm proven wrong. There's always something that shows up and I said, wow, that's a new one. And then all of a sudden that shows up again. So it's been an interesting evolution. I think one of the challenges, and this plays to your question, are patients the lifeblood for practice or are they liability? Well, of course, they're both. Now, statistically speaking, most patients really like their doctor. Indeed, most patients love their doctor. They've invested in that practice, and they're rooting for the doctor to succeed. And the doctor, of course, wants the patient to do well. But every practice has them. There are a handful of patients that the doctor wishes had never darkened their doorstep, and the patient wishes they had never gone there either. The question is how to gracefully de-escalate an evolving conflict. And the challenge, of course, is that even though these patients are few and far between, they occupy 99% of the doctor's brain space while the conflict is brewing. So it definitely needs attention.
You know, and Jeff, and when you and I have talked about this over the years about the reason why you started Medical Justice is, you know, in some ways it was out of anger because you, as you said, you didn't feel like you ever got your say. And so an organization that really started because of this one lawsuit that made you so passionately and angry about it, you kind of went on the attack, but all of a sudden as I see it, as a serial entrepreneur, you saw this other opportunity that was out there to help medical providers in ways in which originally you never saw. And that's kind of where eMerit comes in the picture.
Yeah, in fact, it's an interesting evolution. What happened was one of our clients, one of our members, was being sued for a frivolous reason. Yet at the same time, he was getting slammed on the internet. And this was new to him, was new to us. At the time, doctor review sites just didn't exist. They were at their beginning, but it looked like a very powerful tool to take a practice down. I was viewing it strictly from the standpoint of, it's a negative experience. Someone's trying to destroy a practice. What we learned very quickly was that the silent majority did not have a platform. Getting back to my theme earlier, most patients, they don't just like their doctor, they love their doctor. But most of the time, because they're busy and they're like you and me, they don't go and post about their experiences online. So those people didn't really have a voice. My thinking was, if we made it easy for such patients to post their comments online, doing it at the point of service, then you could neutralize any negativity that's out there. In fact, our thinking was, don't spend so much time thinking about the negative. Think about how to rally the voice of those who like what you do. And that became the mantra. The solution to pollution is dilution. And what was surprising to me was that not only did it, kind of address the story, we learned that there is no more powerful marketing technique. Doctors who have embraced the online world and have tapped into their patients to tell their stories online are making a lot of money. I mean, you see a lot of new patient volume, new patient revenue, and it's not incremental, it's significant. The younger generation has embraced it, more rapidly than others, and they've seen that they look like seasoned veterans without much effort because they're digital natives and they embrace this technology. So eMerit was the tool which made this easy, how to capture feedback at the point of service and get it uploaded to the dominant review sites found on page 1 of a Google search.
That's awesome. Well, let's pause for a moment and we'll talk more about this and your experience with being a doctor and representing doctors. And we'll learn more about this after the break.
Many business owners use legal counsel as a last resort rather than as a proactive tool that can further their success. Why? For most, it's the fear of unknown legal costs. ByrdAdatto's Access Plus program makes it possible for you to get the ongoing legal assistance you need for one predictable monthly fee. That gives you unlimited phone and email access to the legal team, so you can receive feedback on legal concerns as they arise. Access Plus, a smarter, simpler way to access legal services. Find out more. Visit ByrdAdatto.com today.
Welcome back. Jeff, you just gave this incredible story of this being a passion, and your passion being that here you were helping patients, but then basically overnight, your son Josh became the number one patient in your life. And so in doing so, you open yourself up to new ways of helping others in ways. And obviously, as you said in the very beginning, you never anticipated one day becoming a lawyer. But as doors, as things change, new opportunities present themselves. So appreciate you sharing that so far. But I think we're going to dive a little bit deeper now. And I think one thing that we can all agree is running a successful medical practice, you have to have patience. I'm not sure of any other way to have a medical practice unless you have patience. So I think we all agree to that. But Jeff, would you agree that the patients can be the biggest risk to a medical practice?
There's no doubt. I mean, the two big sources of risk to a practice will be employees or patients. But because you see so many more patients than employees, and you live and work with employees over time, you can certainly feel them out and see how they work over time. It's a numbers game. If you are a busy practice and you see 500 to 2,000 patients a year, as well as you believe you can screen all patients, you just can't. Every practice gets them. And early in your career, you're more likely to bring into your practice someone who makes your life miserable. Let me give you the clue. It's oh, I've been to 3 other doctors before you, and they were just butchers. They tore me apart, but I've heard so many wonderful things about you, Dr. Segal. I'm certain you can help me. And of course, in my brain, I'm thinking, of course I can help you. I'm so much better than all these people, even though I have less experience and less wisdom, and I'm less arrogant. You've seen that play out over and over again. And over time, we all get wiser. But even when we get wiser, people still slip through the cracks, and it creates a headache for practice. I have this conversation virtually every day, certainly every week. And they say, I just didn't see it coming. Normally, I'm pretty good about screening for these patients. And we've certainly heard from practices, had I known about this particular patient, I would have paid them. I would have paid them out of my own pocket to stay away. Now, that doesn't define most of the practice, but when you have one of those people, it so consumes you that there's got to be a way out. And we've been working on multiple ways to de-escalate precisely those types of conflicts. They can't all be resolved, but you want to do your best to resolve them before people lawyer up. Because once people lawyer up, you've gone from 2 brains to 4 brains. And that's a much more challenging mix, much more volatile collection of emotions.
I think that works in the practice of law as well. That same clue that when they start talking about how unhappy they were with the prior 2 lawyers, that we should have our antennas up. And it probably just comes down to they are going to have expectations that are very difficult, if not impossible, to meet.
It's interesting. So we talk to physicians. They have the patient from hell, and they're going, God, I hope a lawyer doesn't take their case. The first thing I tell them is, as difficult as this patient is to you, they will be equally difficult to the attorney. Just imagine that relationship. Do you think it's going to get started? That generally does not cause relief when I tell them that. They're still freaking out.
Yeah. Well, there's no short of opinions on how physicians should protect themselves from patients. And our theme for season 2 is thinking outside the box. And so what really draws us, well, we knew instantly, Jeff, that when we had this theme that you were going to be on, because that pretty much captures your entrepreneurial spirit. But specifically, your idea to create eMerit is such a great way to deal with these problem patients, and you're dealing with it in the inverse, which kind of goes back to your statement a few minutes ago. You said, the catchphrase solution to pollution is dilution. But talk a little bit more about your observations on capturing the happy patients and getting their voice onto the online platform.
Yeah, we even broaden it. We think you should be capturing the voice of all your patients. That way you can drive quality and customer service to where you want to be. Most doctors are type A. It's competitive. They want to be in the right hand of the bell curve. And the best way to do that is to ask your patients. Now, it's difficult to ask your patients, hey, how'd I do? But if you give them the survey that we have, and this survey can be customized, so you can ask any question you want, but it also asks the questions that are typically found in the doctor review sites, you get an unlimited amount of information you can use to drive quality. You can use it to push your employees to deliver better and better service, and you can find out sooner rather than later if someone is unhappy. Wouldn't it be better to find out someone is teetering on the edge of becoming a dissatisfied patient than waiting until they blast you online to the end of the universe? Yeah, sooner is better. So it's an early warning tool. It's also a way to take what you do and have your patients do the advertising for you. And then finally, the thing that's kind of interesting is that every doctor gets a negative review. There are no doctors that have no negative reviews. You just don't want a lot of them. But if you have an occasional negative review, that's better than having only positive reviews. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but it makes every other review, the positive review, look authentic, look credible. Now, when I go a step further and suggest that because that patient wrote you a negative review and because it makes all the other reviews look credible and authentic, you should write that patient a thank you note and send them some flowers, that usually falls on deaf ears. Most people are not saying that back to me.
And that, I think that's perfect because, I love how we're talking about what you saw was a way of taking something that was negative, turning it into something positive, and then really finding ways to work with patients that were happy. And then every once in a while, as you said, there may be some unhappy patient that posts a negative review, but sometimes these patients go further. They get really negative, and not only do they post that negative review, but they go, to the medical boards, they end up filing lawsuits. And I know that something you've always been a part of is with medical justice is really coming up with strategies to help defend those practices. And we'd love to hear some of your thoughts and share some of your wisdom of the things that y'all have done over the years at medical justice.
So we've blended those two together. Initially, medical justice and eMerit were separate divisions. They were two different hands. Now they work hand in glove with each other because reputation and de-escalating patient conflict really are different sides of the same coin. Anytime there's a potential crisis related to a doctor-patient conundrum, it typically manifests itself early online. I mean, that's usually the first way a doctor finds out about it if the patient's not complaining directly to the practice. The flip side's also true, is that if you're not engaged in the online world, you're missing out on so much of a marketing opportunity, and there's no reason to leave all that on the table. If you pay attention to this up front, it is the least expensive marketing tool that exists. So let me give you an example. If many people use Google pay-per-click campaigns, every month they have to refill the till. You keep having to put more cash into it. People click on the link, they go to your website. Every month is a new month. But with online reviews, they stay up there forever. So once you've captured that from a patient, you do need to replenish it on a regular basis, but not like an ad campaign. And plus, this is the authentic voice of the patient. It's social trust. Now, I came into this as a skeptic. I didn't believe, well, I personally wouldn't go to the internet to select a doctor. That was my thinking about a decade ago. But I've learned that I'm an outlier, that most people today are going to the internet. About 25% are selecting their doctor initially on the internet. And the rest, if they're referred to a doctor the traditional way, meaning a family member or a referring doctor, those patients, prospective patients, are still going to the internet to validate that doctor. So gone are the days that you could just plant a flag and show up to work and be able and affable and available. Those are the 3 A's. Did I leave out an A? I think I got them. Gone are those days. You also have to have an online presence. And if you think that you can just sit back, unless you're the only game in town. If you're the only game in town for 100 miles, you got to pay attention to the internet.
Yeah. And just one follow-up question, I think, Jeff, and this is for our audience, and I know you've talked about this at length over the years, but one question we get hit with all the time, which is when someone does post that negative review, can I respond to them, and how do I respond to them? And I know that's something the audience is always asking. I know you have a really good answer for that.
Yeah. So now don't kill the messenger. Okay. I'm just bringing the news. I didn't write the statutes. There's this mistaken belief that because a patient is out of themselves on the internet and told their story, that you can just spew venom with their medical record online to so-called correct the record. Let me disabuse all doctors of that notion. You cannot do that unless you have the patient's prior written authorization to do that. And if a patient is spewing bile all over the internet, odds are you don't have their prior written authorization to share the protected health information. Now, that's the bad news. There's the good news. The good news is frequently you can you can respond. There are ways to respond as long as you're not disclosing protected health information. So there are HIPAA compliant ways to do it where you're speaking broadly and generally. And I'll just give a brief example. So if someone writes, Dr. Segal was a butcher and I got an infection on my face and he wants to charge me $30,000 to fix my face. The answer would be, we're sorry, anytime any patient has a complication, our infection rate is under 0.5%, whereas nationally the average is 2%. Still, all patients are important, none are statistics, et cetera, et cetera. Here what you've done is you've told your story, but you've done it generally and you've not had to disclose any protected health information. Surely we could do that in a more sophisticated way, but in the interest of time, I thought I'd just illustrate it can be done.
Yeah, and that's perfect. And the best part about all that is those who want to try to understand how to do it better, that's what medical justice is there for, and eMerit to help them with those pieces. But I think today we've got a really good basis for our audience to understand, what's out there, how to start really thinking about ways to protect themselves. And maybe, Michael, as we kind of walk through we're going to conclude here, what are some of the takeaways that you took away that we can share with our audience?
Well, what's exciting is that for many of my speeches over the years, when I talk about patient risk, I always say your first line of defense is your medical malpractice. Your second line of defense is your asset protection strategy. And I think that medical justice fills a first step, which is de-escalation of conflict, so that you don't even have to get to making a claim under your policy. And so we found time and time again that just because you're covered, while that's great, if you do get sued, that there's a real cost, both long-term in your policy and in the amount of time you're going to be spending defending yourself. And so that's kind of my biggest takeaway from today, is that if you engage in a process of de-escalation, that you can really save yourself a lot of time and emotional trauma.
Yeah. And Jeff, the mic is yours at this point. You have any good closing thoughts for our audience?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to think of professional liability insurance the way I think of term life insurance. You really don't want to use either of them. You're glad you have them, but you don't want to use either. As it relates to term life insurance, you're better off living a healthy life. And I think if you can de-escalate a conflict with a patient, which is our sweet spot with medical justice, you're going to be best served by doing that. You will definitely sleep better at night.
Awesome. Thanks again for joining us, Jeff.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks again for joining us today. And remember, if you like this episode, please subscribe, make sure to give us a 5-star rating, and share with your friends.
You can also sign up for the ByrdAdatto newsletter by going to our website at ByrdAdatto.com.
ByrdAdatto is providing this podcast as a public service. This podcast is for educational purposes only. This podcast does not constitute legal advice, nor does it establish an attorney-client relationship. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by ByrdAdatto. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Please consult with an attorney on your legal issues.